resource-intensive process, but I think the Commonwealth has a lot to thank you for making sure that we got through that successfully, and we really do have a unique regulatory process, unique among states in the U.S., that I think is going to help facilitate development of projects going forward. I've been asked to talk a little bit about wind initiatives and project siting, and I struggled a little bit in terms of exactly how to frame that and what information I thought would be useful to you all. And frankly, I wasn't entirely sure. Alex, you probably weren't entirely sure what the audience would be composed of in terms of background. So I'm going to offer some snapshots that pertain to siting of wind in Virginia and offer some other information that I think would be relevant or useful. I know that some of you, some of this might be duplicating what you've heard in other talks or what you've read or what you're already involved with, but nonetheless, I will hopefully offer a few little gems here that might be useful. I'll talk a bit about wind fundamentals and measurement, again, geared toward the folks in the room who maybe have very limited exposure to wind. A bit about the national perspective, but I'll go through that fairly quickly. You've heard from Brad and others about where we stand in terms of wind development across the country, state perspective. And then I'll talk a little bit about our Virginia Center for Wind Energy at JMU, and in particular, how we engage to support various stakeholder groups and citizens in other activities such as the PDR process in Virginia. And then finally, I'll spend more of my time on some of the siting resources that we have helped to develop and implement here. Time remaining, and if there's interest, I'll spend a little bit of time on the offshore opportunities to Virginia as well. Now, I guess I'm obligated, given my background, to talk a little bit about the physics and the engineering. I'm not going to get into great technical detail, but I think it's important to at least characterize a few points regarding wind. And I oftentimes, when I teach this subject matter, and I know you guys in the back of the room, you thought you were going to get an extra day off this week, but in fact you get an extra day this week, so sorry about that. They've heard a lot of this, but in any event, the wind resource is very different than the solar resource in one very important way, and that is that it is much more difficult to characterize because it is spatially, geographically much more variable and depends a lot about the terrain, the elevation, the presence of obstructions, and so on. So I use Roanoke as an example often, how on any given day at a given moment in time, the solar resource in Harrisonburg and Roanoke are probably fairly similar. But on the other hand, the wind resource, even on our campus, may vary significantly across hundreds of feet. So it's important to understand that, and also to understand that it is so dependent on what's going on in the local environment that the measurements are very important to the industry. Again, another I guess scientific point, but one worth pointing out a second, a third time if you've heard it before, is that the power available in the wind relates to the speed of the wind cubed. And what that implies is that small changes in the wind speed, let's say a 3% variation in wind speed, results in a much more significant change in the power. Again, from the point of view from a developer, someone who's managing a wind farm, a homeowner who's relying on one to offset some of their power, some of the power that they buy from the utility, it shows that the sensitivity of wind speeds is an important concern. And in fact, if a developer were to significantly over or underestimate the wind resource in a given location that they're developing, well, then that has very dire financial consequences, as I'm sure the developers in the room can attest. Wind shear. So we understand also that wind speeds change, increase, not only as we go up from the Earth's surface. As I mentioned already, the presence of obstruction causes turbulence, causes the wind to behave in ways that is not so suitable for wind resource or wind development. And all this really points to one very important thing, and that is that height matters. Height really matters. It's important to make sure that in a given project of a given capacity, given a local wind resource, that the turbine is allowed to be placed at a height that is recommended by a manufacturer, and that where the winds are going to be suitable for development. I've worked with numerous counties in Virginia to help develop ordinances and this is arguably the most sensitive issue that comes to the table. How high can you place these things? And trying to convey to the public who are involved in this debate why it's so important to put the winds at a height that is going to hopefully bear returns that would be considered reasonable and cost effective. So there are various ways to measure the winds, but the more traditional one is simply to install a tower. There are meteorological towers installed as we speak all over Virginia at certain locations where developers are interested. I think that Bruce already made a remark about our own anemometer program, and we've been at that for about 10 years. We've visited over 30 sites in the hopes that we can provide data and information that would be useful not only to the development community but also to residents, small businesses, farmers, etc., who might be interested in measuring the winds. And to be perfectly honest, I think you've already seen some wind maps up here already today, and what we have found is those wind maps, while they are very useful and certainly very visual and provide us on a more macroscopic scale some sense of where the winds are stronger, where they're weaker. When you get right down into local siting, the winds have very limited usefulness. And you really do need those measurements at a site to have any semblance of certainty in terms of what the resource is like and how it is going to play out once you get in there and start installing machines and measuring their outputs. Meteorological towers use very simple devices. On the left you see an anemometer, spinning cup anemometer, very self-explanatory. It's got 3 cups, it spins, and the rotational speed is proportional to the wind speed. And on the right-hand side, a wind vane that points in the direction of the winds, and of course the other important element you don't see in this photo, at the base of the tower would be a data logger where all that information is gathered and collected and later can be processed. And these towers, I'll just go back up for a second, you're looking up a 50-meter, 165-foot tower. Those take a lot of time and a lot of man and woman power to install. We have several of those in our inventory. We will spend a good solid 3 days to get one of those up. So it's not a trivial task. But once they're up, they're very stable. We have not in 10 years seen one come down due to high winds or weather. Thank goodness no one's been injured or hurt or anything like that. We've had very good we have a very good safety record. But nonetheless, it's a lot of work and it's not an easy process. But it is the industry standard today. We have 50-meter masts. Now you see the industry installing up to 60 meters. Dawn or any of the other developers, is that about as high as you go? A 60-meter mast?
They're making some 80s.
I think there are 80s now coming out. I wouldn't touch one of those. But
60s are pretty tall.
yeah, and 60s are probably just about as far as you go with a tilt up, I would imagine.
Yeah,
There's also new technology coming of age. One is known as SODAR, Sonic Detection and Ranging. These are devices, we have one in our inventory. They look like a great big oversized washing machine with a cover on the top. You open it up, it emits every couple of seconds a chirp up into the atmosphere. Based on the reflections that come back down, wind speeds can be measured. The advantage to these is, unlike with the towers, you don't need to spend days with a crew of 4, 5, or 6 installing. You literally put one on the back of a small trailer, bring it to your site, drop it off, flip the switch, and off it goes. And it's uplinked through satellite, sends the data along, and it's a very convenient and easy installation. And the other benefit is, if you notice the scales here, there's a 60-meter mast, and notice proportionally how much taller a traditional, according to the sizes we see today, commercial wind turbine is. So the 60-meter mast provides very good information up to 60 meters. Now you don't have to guess above that, and there are formulations and very scientifically grounded ways to extrapolate up to higher elevations. However, 2 challenges. One is you are extrapolating, and there's error involved in that process. And number 2, if you're a developer and you're looking at a long ridge line or a large area, how many towers can you afford to install? How do you get into those points in between? So the SODAR or other technologies based on light emissions provide you a way, a very fast way to fill in those spaces that you're not looking at with your towers. but it is not yet the industry standard. I think we're seeing a slow evolution toward, I wouldn't suggest that towers are going to be phased out, the direct measurements, but I think that the SODAR and LiDAR technologies are improving all the time and ultimately are going to be bankable as far as development is concerned. And in fact, that is an image on the left. It's maybe a little washed out, but what you see here is a digital terrain model in western Rockingham County, and this is a site with prospective turbines inserted here visually in our SODAR with our students, some of them in the room right now. We did a site visit out there, and this is just emblematic of what we're striving to do in Virginia, and that is to partner with the developers, as you can see with the county as well, with a company that is now active in Virginia, has an office in the Eastern Shore, and is engaged in wind modeling and forecasting. And what we're trying to promote, again, not only in regard to siting and siting assessment, but also supporting other efforts such as forecasting, developing better models, trying to promote ways of working together with the academic and the community and the industry side so that we can leverage each other's resources and talents. And so far, this relationship has worked very well. A gentleman from Rockingham County in the back, John, who we've worked closely with, and we've supported their ordinance developments on 2 occasions now. Soleil Renewable Energy, who is interested and is examining this site along with Dominion, have worked very closely with us in Weatherflow as well. So we will continue to support where development occurs in any ways that we can. And frankly, from my own perspective, this gives me a venue where students can engage outside of the classroom and in the real world and understand better what the limitations are and what your constraints are in the industry. But I won't talk much about forecasting except to acknowledge that this is a research area that we can now engage in because we have access to very good meteorological data from Soleil's towers. They have access to our SODAR data. We all work together and everybody gains from the process. Now nationally, again, you've heard from Brad already. I think everybody understands sort of what the progression has been. Brad, I don't think you talked much about the 20% report, but I think it's worth pointing this out. About 5-6 years ago, former President Bush visited the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I don't remember his comment verbatim, but he did remark that at that time that there appeared to be technology having come along far enough that we probably could get to some much loftier goal, 20-25% wind energy. And I know you all at AWEA heard that loud and clear, and folks in the wind program at Department of Energy and experts across the country, and the question was raised, well, is this indeed feasible, what President Bush has said, and is this is something we need to examine closely. Without getting into all the details, what transpired from there was that over 100 experts from different agencies, from different walks of life, worked very closely together, and in 2008 published this report. It was approved by the White House as well, that paints a scenario. That's the terminology the Department of Energy likes to use. It's not a policy statement, it's not a goal, it's a scenario, what 20% wind by 2030 might look like. Now I think, Brad, your statistic was we're at 2.3% now. And at about the time this report was issued, we were at about 1%, maybe a little higher. So we've made some headway in that direction already, but 2% to 20%, that's a long way to go in about 20 years. And this report, though, painted, I would say, a very optimistic scenario. Didn't identify any roadblocks or barriers that would be particularly difficult to overcome. I like to use the expression, it wouldn't require an Apollo-like effort. But it does acknowledge that there are shortcomings that need to be addressed in our transmission infrastructure. I think that it recognizes that we need more consistent and perhaps more aggressive policies in the U.S. So there are things that need to be addressed in order for 20% by 2030 to occur. But at least it painted a scenario that, to all the experts at the table who were authored and reviewed this report, felt was a reasonable expectation. This is a graphic from that report. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the bar that I had that shows the progress to date. You heard from Brad that in 2010 we were a little bit off, but 2008, 2009,